Based on that methodology and that process and that study, were you able to extract the data from the SD card and identify the first power-on event of the defendant's Lexus on January 29th, 2022 to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, I was.
And do you have an opinion about what time that Lexus, the defendant's Lexus, was powered on December 29th, 2022 for the first time?
Yes, that would be approximately 12/12/36.
And is that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, it is.
On your chalk on the screen, does the power out event, is that the same as your interpretation?
Yes, it is.
The 12/12/36 a.m. time, what time clock is that based on?
Sure, so that's based on the internal clock in the Lexus.
The clock in the Lexus, is that a universal time, or do clocks on different devices run differently?
Sure, so it's not a universal time. Clocks on different devices run differently. So if you've ever noticed that your microwave clock is not running in sync with your iPhone, the same thing is occurring here. Even though the Lexus clock is communicating back and forth with the GPS satellites and other things, the clock is still not synchronized perfectly. So you would not expect this clock to match up perfect with other devices.
When you're considering two very different or separate devices, if the time is different, what would that be called?
Sure, so that would be called what's called a clock variance.
I want to get into that later, but I want to finish what we have in front of us now.
Sure.
In addition to identifying the first power-on event of January 29, 2022 of the defendant's Lexus at 12/12/36, were you able to identify the first power-off event of that same Lexus for January 29, 2022?
Yes, I was, and that was at 12:42:08 approximately.
Did you use the same methodology and vetting that you did and testing that you did with the power-on event?
Yes, I did.
And do you have an opinion if that time is accurate to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, I do.
And what is that opinion?
So that opinion is that time is reliable to the second as far as the Lexus clock is concerned.
What is the graph on the bottom showing us?
Sure. So the graph is just a graphical representation of the same data, representing the power-on event on a timeline at 12/12/36 and the power-off event at approximately 12:42:08.
When you're looking at times, power-on and power-off events to date and time it, are you obtaining that information independent of other outside information?
Yes, I am.
Is the data simply the data, or does something affect it?
Sure. So, no, the data is simply the data. So when we get the data, we can compare it to outside sources or external sources to verify that it's consistent with other sources. But the data does not depend on any outside sources.
Do you oftentimes use outside sources to vet or test the data, even though it's a totally separate concept?
Yes, I do.
After this power-on, power-off event, when you studied the data from the SD card using the same methodology and technique, did you find any other subsequent power-on and power-off events for the defendant's Lexus on January 29, 2022 after this event?
Yes, I did.
Could we have slide 33, please? Mr. Burgess, can you tell us what the next event is that you found in the data?
Sure. So the next power-on event occurs at 5:07:46. That's this top timestamp here. The infotainment system records a power-off event after that at 5:46:20. And what we have here is we've got surveillance video that was provided that depicts the approximate time range that those two events happen. So these videos do not capture the actual power on or power off event, but they occur around the same time frame and they are consistent with one another.
The power on event time that you've listed as 5:07:46, where does that time come from?
So that time is coming from the internal Lexus clock.
And based on the data from the Lexus clock, do you have an opinion as to the accuracy of that time of 5:07:46 a.m. as it relates to the Lexus clock?
Yes, I do.
And what's your opinion?
So compared to the Lexus clock, that time is accurate to the second.
The videos you have, are those timed from the same Lexus clock or a different source?
No, so those timestamps of the videos are coming from external sources. In the example of these videos, I believe that is a Ring camera.
Why would you try to vet the timestamp that you've identified to the second from the Lexus clock with another item, including a video that uses a different clock?
Sure. So that further validates that those timestamps are accurate and they're consistent with timestamps we're seeing from other devices.
Can there be a variance with other devices?
There can be a variance.
If there's a variance, could that still corroborate or support the original timestamp from the Lexus clock?
Yes. So even with a variance, those timestamps can still be consistent with one another.
And on the two photographs, are those videos or photographs?
Those are videos.
What is the purpose of including a video?
Sure. So the purpose of including the video is just to depict that the video does not actually capture the power on or power off event. But again, it is around the same time frame that the power on and power off event occur.
Ms. Gilman, are you able to play the video to the left? Okay, thank you. What about that video vets or corroborates the 5:07:46 Lexus time on the power on event?
Objection, Your Honor.
A little bit more before you get to that, Mr. Burrell.
Okay. Did you use the video that we just saw in an attempt to vet or corroborate the timestamp for the power on event on the Lexus?
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
Sure. So looking at the start timestamp on the video, we can see that the video starts at approximately 5:07:58. Keeping in mind this timestamp is coming from the camera or the Ring video, the Ring camera itself. And when we look at the power on event, we see that it occurs at 5:07:46. So although we don't see the actual time of the power on event, that is consistent with what we would expect.
What does the video on the right help us do?
So video on the right helps us do the same thing. So when we look at the power off event, that occurs at 5:46:20. Again, when we look at the Ring video on the right, that start timestamp of that video is 5:46:29. So again, we missed the power off portion of when that occurs, but that is consistent, again, with what we would expect.
Could we play the video on the right? If you could enlarge, that would be helpful. If not, if you could stop the video, please. Mr. Burgess, you see the lights are on that vehicle?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can you tell if the vehicle's on or off at that point?
Sure. So I cannot tell if the vehicle is on or off at that point. Typically, when you power off a Lexus or a modern vehicle, the lights will stay on for some portion of time afterwards. But again, that is consistent with the timestamp from the power off event.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the accuracy of the power on and power off events as they pertain to the Lexus clock?
Yes, I do.
And what is that opinion?
And that is that those timestamps are accurate to the second.
Did you further follow the data to see if there was any other power on, power off events relative to the Lexus for January 29, 2022?
Yes, I did.
Could you take us to Exhibit 34, please? What is this, Mr. Burgess?
Sure. So this is the next time that the vehicle is powered on and subsequently powered off. That power on event occurs at 12:35:01. The power off event occurs at 2:12:01. And then this video is a video from alarm.com surveillance that depicts the vehicle pulling into a driveway and shutting off. So when we look at the video and we watch the video, you can actually see at 2:12:01 in the video timestamp that the windshield wipers stop moving and the vehicle's suspension begins to lower, indicating that the ignition button has been pressed.
Let's start with the power on event. Was there any video available to show the power on event at 12:35:01?
There is no video available that I'm aware of.
On the last slide, you had the power off event at 5:46:20 a.m.
Correct.
Was there any other power on, power off events between 5:46:20 a.m. and this event here?
No, there was not.
Did you try to obtain any collateral or cooperative video or evidence relative to the power on event of 12:35:01?
I did request or make a request to see if there was any video available, and as far as I'm aware, there was not.
Regarding the power on event, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the accuracy of the power on event as it relates to the Lexus clock on the system?
Yes, I do.
And what is that opinion?
That is that power on event is accurate to the second in reference to the Lexus clock.
12:35:01 p.m.?
Correct.
And do you have an opinion as to the power off event to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the accuracy from the data you recovered from the SD card?
Yes, I do. And that power off event, again, occurred at approximately 2:12:01, according to the Lexus clock.
I don't know if you can enlarge the video, Ms. Gilman, but if you can, and if not, could you play anyways? Thank you. And could you explain for us the graph on the bottom of that exhibit? Or,
Sure.
pardon me, of that diagram?
Sure. So that graph, again, is just a timeline graphical representation of when that power off event occurred and when the power on event occurred and when the power off event occurred at 12:35:01 and 2:12:01.
Based on the data you analyzed from the SD card, was there any further power on and power off events on January 29, 2022 after this 12:35:01 to 2:12:01 event?
Yes, there was.
Could you display for us page 35, Ms. Gilman? And what is this, Mr. Burgess?
Sure. So this is the next power on event that is recorded within the system. And that power on event occurs approximately 4:11:46. and the power off event occurs at 4:12:56. The video we see is that same alarm.com surveillance video. The start timestamp of that video is 4:12:03. So again, we don't see the actual power on and off event within the video, but it is consistent with what we would expect as the power on event occurring at 4:11:46, and then the video starting, and we see the car backing up at 4:12:03.
Would the alarm.com be using a different clock than that of the Lexus?
It would be, yes.
And based on your methodology in vetting and testing in view of the data on the SD card, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to the time of this power on event?
Yes, so that power on event would be 4:11:46.
And do you have an opinion as to the time of the power off event related to this diagram?
Yes, that would be 4:12:56.
Is that opinion as well to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, it is.
Is that a photograph or a video?
That is also a video.
Ms. Gilman, could you help us? Thank you. And similarly, does the graph give a general idea of the time?
Yes, so similarly, the graph is a timeline representation of the power on and power off event.
Mr. Burgess, was there an additional power on, power off event after the power off event at 4:12:56 p.m. at the Dighton residence?
Yes, there was.
Ms. Gilman, could you show us number 36, please? Mr. Burgess, could you take us through this one?
Sure. So this is the next power off or power on event that occurs, and that power on event occurs at 5:34:51 p.m. The power off event occurs at 5:36:42. Again, the video that is associated with this does not show the power on or the power off event, but it shows the time just before the vehicle is arriving to this location on a tow truck, and that would be consistent with the vehicle then being powered off and backed off of the tow truck at that time.
And based on your analysis of the data, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty what time this power on event took place?
Yes, and that time would be 5:34:51.
And that's according to the internal Lexus clock?
Yes, it is.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty when this vehicle was then powered off?
Yes, and that would be 5:36:42.
Again, pursuant to the Lexus clock.
Correct.
After this event at 5:34:51 p.m. to 5:36:42 p.m., when you studied the data, were there any other power on or power off events for this Lexus vehicle on January 29, 2022?
Not that I studied after this event.
Could you take that down, please? Now, we touched on an issue earlier. I want you to give your opinions and explain to the jury. You mentioned the word variance between different items. I don't think you used the word items. You said something else.
Sure. So that's going to be the clock variance between different devices. So in this instance, what we're referring to is the difference in the clocks of the Lexus module and an iPhone. So we would not expect those clocks to be perfectly synced. Typically what we see, and is what is generally accepted, is a clock variance of up to 60 seconds. And that is because when you think about when you're looking at your radio and you're looking at the clock, it's representing to you the hours and the minutes. It's not representing the seconds. So again, it's accurate. Its function is to be accurate to the minute, but its function is not to be accurate to the second.
Is a variance between different devices an accepted concept in your community?
Yes, it is an accepted concept in my community.
When you were looking for power on, power off information from the data on the SD card, what clock would that information, that time, be dependent on?
Sure. So that's going to be dependent on the Lexus clock. That Lexus clock is continuously running, but it also syncs up with GPS systems to update the clock on occasion. We do not know how frequent that activity occurs because that is proprietary to the manufacturer themselves.
To bring us back, when you started this case, there were two important text stream events?
Correct. There were two text stream events.
Remind us what those were.
Sure. So one is going to be associated with a three-point turn, and the other is going to be associated with a backing maneuver.
In those two text stream events, are they related in any way to the running clock that is on the text stream data?
Sure. So when we think back, the text stream events have that running clock from ignition on, and because we know the power on events from the infotainment module, we can reconcile when those time counts occurred.
If there's information about timing from text stream data on the Lexus, what would you have to do if you took a separate device like an iPhone and you wanted to reconcile the variance?
Sure. So if we want to reconcile the variance, what we would need is we would need an event that occurs that both clocks record. So for instance, if you've got two cameras that are recording you jumping up and down, you would take your motion of jumping up and down, or your event of jumping up and down, and you would use that event to sync the clocks of those two cameras. So essentially, we're doing the same thing with the Lexus clock and the iPhone clock.
When you did your analysis during this case, initially, did you have any interest in trying to reconcile those clocks?
No, I did not.
Why not?
Because that is generally accepted that the clock variance is up to 60 seconds. And while reviewing the power on and off events and comparing that to the surveillance videos that were provided, that was consistent with what we would have expected.
Did something compel you to further your study and compare the Lexus clock information on those two text stream events, the three-point turn and the backing maneuver, to a different device?
Yes, there was a claim of attempting to synchronize those two clocks that I believed was potentially misleading.
So based on reviewing that information and coming to that conclusion, did you on your own do any further study about the difference in clocks and attempt to synchronize them?
Yes, I did.
You said that you can synchronize if you have more than one device identifying a particular time. What did you mean by that?
Sure. So if we've got two devices that are recording a similar event, so let's say, for instance, a three-point turn, if that is recorded with an iPhone, with the iPhone's clock, we can compare that event to the time that that event occurs and is recorded by the Lexus.
Were you aware of any device other than the Lexus recording that three-point turn?
Yes, I was.
What were you aware of?
That would be an iPhone from Mr. O'Keefe.
Did you have data and information from Mr. O'Keefe's phone some time ago?
I did have partial location data from Mr. O'Keefe's iPhone